Have you ever wondered what those small metal pieces in your pocket or those digital numbers shining on your phone screen actually are? Most of us see them as tools, sources of power, or tickets to our dreams, but in reality, that thing we chase every morning when we wake up is the world's oldest and most fragile ghost. The name of this ghost is trust, and history has whispered to us time and again that when that trust begins to shake, even marble palaces collapse like houses of cards. Sometimes you walk into a market and feel that the chocolate bar you've loved since childhood is a bit lighter. When you open the package, the taste might be the same, but you sense that something inside has diminished, that its soul has been withdrawn. This is not just an economic news story or a simple tale of a price hike. This is the smallest, most domestic version of that massive decay that wipes empires off the map, scatters armies, and turns neighbor against neighbor. Imagine you are a merchant trading on the dusty roads of Rome exactly 2,000 years ago. In your hand, you hold a silver coin, a denarius. This coin is not just a piece of metal, it is a promise given to you by the greatest power of the world at that time, Rome. The face of the emperor upon it guarantees that the coin is pure silver and that this silver has an equivalent value everywhere in the world. When people look at that coin, they actually look at the might of the emperor and the unshakable will of Rome that will never fall. But ruling an empire, maintaining borders, and building those massive roads is a far more expensive task than it seems. When Rome's treasury began to empty, the emperors, instead of telling the people the painful truth, resorted to a much more sinister path. When the silver mines became insufficient, they collected the coins, melted them down, and mixed the silver with a worthless metal, copper. On the surface, everything looked the same. The coin was the same size, it bore the face of the same proud and clever emperor, but the soul within it was slowly dying. As time passed, the silver content in that coin dropped from 98% to 55%, and from there down to a mere 5%. Now, what you held in your hand was not a silver coin, but merely a worthless copper disc painted with silver. Perhaps the people didn't realize this lie at first, but the relentless balance of life noticed the truth immediately. To buy a loaf of bread, you now had to give not one, but 10, 20, or perhaps 50 of those fake coins. Economists call this inflation. Historians call it the footsteps of collapse. But for the Roman of that day, it was the labor of a lifetime slipping through their fingers like water. The savings a retired soldier had accumulated over a lifetime turned into worthless scraps of metal overnight. Once trust is cracked, no emperor's decree and no law can return that money to its former state. Rome did not fall solely because of barbarian attacks from the outside. It had already rotted from within because of those small copper pieces. History is like a recurring theatrical play meant to pull the ears of those who make the same mistakes. 1,500 years later, in the Germany of the 1920s, people woke up to a similar nightmare. The state, crushed under the heavy burden of the First World War, pressed the buttons of the printing presses instead of protecting the value of the currency. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. Everyone had more money in their hands. But this money, like Rome's copper-plated coins, had lost its soul. People began taking to the streets with wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread from the bakery. Imagine, on a winter evening, burning those bills to heat your home was cheaper than buying firewood. Children played in the streets, building towers out of valuable banknotes because those pieces of paper were now nothing more than toys. At that moment, when a human's lifetime of labor does not even buy a cup of coffee, the moral compass of society is broken. In those moments, hopelessness spreads like poison into people's hearts. A person who sees that the money in their pocket has no value begins to listen to the most radical ideas and the harshest voices. In that deep economic pit of Germany, the seeds of those dark ideologies that would later set the world on fire were sown. Money is not just a medium of exchange, it is also a silent contract that ensures the peace of a society. And when that contract is broken, savagery begins. A similar story took place in Zimbabwe, and in very recent history, people carried trillion-dollar banknotes in their pockets but could find nothing to fill their stomachs. The numbers had grown so large that even mathematics struggled to carry the weight of this lie. Eventually, people threw their own money into the fire and sought refuge in the currencies of other countries. It was now impossible for a people who had lost faith in their own state and the future of their currency to build a future on those lands. So, where are we in this story today? In the modern world, we no longer melt the silver inside coins. Now, everything is cleaner, more digital, and faster. In 1971, along with the rest of the world, we made a decision and severed the last link between money and gold or silver. Now, there is no physical mineral, no solid ground to hold onto behind our money. There is only a mutual contract of trust. In other words, we are actually inside a giant game of make-believe. Governments no longer even run the printing presses. They can create trillions in new value by moving their fingers at computer screens. But there is a rule that hasn't changed since Rome. Everything created out of nothing is a piece stolen from the real value in someone else's pocket. If the purchase purchasing power of the money in your pocket is melting away day by day, know that someone is silently continuing to steal the invisible silver from within that money. They tell us that inflation is the price of growth. They tell us that more debt will bring more money. But history tells us something else. There is no difference between a Roman emperor thinking he could deceive his people with that copper coin and today's massive debt spirals. Names change, technology evolves, but the human greed to abuse this imaginary power they created never ends. What then is real wealth? Is it the fluctuating digits in a bank account, or the things we can feel with our hands that we labor for and that resist time? Land, a craft, a skill that can help another, or a truly functioning production center? Throughout history, when the soul of money was withdrawn, those who stood tall were always those who held onto these real values. Paper burns, numbers are erased, but human skill and the fertility of the land always remain. Right now, billions of people are sacrificing their lives for pieces of paper and digital signals that have no physical equivalent. As long as the system works smoothly, it seems as if there is no problem. But once that thin thread of trust begins to snap, the risk of those giant skyscrapers and glittering financial centers cracking becomes apparent. Trust is a delicate bird that takes centuries to earn, but only a few wrong decisions to lose. When you think of the fall of Rome, do not imagine barbarians tearing down those massive gates. Those gates had already been torn down from the inside. Those little copper games in the treasury had already exhausted the honesty in the heart of society and faith in the future. If the value that represents honesty and the reward for labor is corrupted in a society, that society's defense mechanisms also collapse. The death of money is, in fact, the death of the social soul. Do not look at the money in your pocket merely as a means of payment. Look at it as a symbol of your time, your labor, and your dreams. If that symbol is breaking a little more each day, it is not just an economic problem, it is a piece being stolen from your life. History shows us that those who play games with money always win short-term victories, but the price is always paid by ordinary people, those honest working crowds. Today, you might think everything is very secure and under control, but the people of old thought so too. If you had told a German citizen in 1913 that 10 years later their precious money wouldn't even be worth firewood, they would have laughed at you. If you had explained to a Roman in the 1st century that their magnificent silver coin would one day be as worthless as a piece of mud, they would have taken it as a great insult. But it happened, and it continues to happen. So how do we get out of this cycle? Perhaps the first step is to stop believing in those glittering fairy tales we are told and return to reality, to tangible values. We must remember that money is a ghost, and what is real is the human labor and trust that the money represents. If we cannot rebuild trust, no matter how much money we print, we will only be writing our own downfall with larger numbers. History is like a teacher, but it only speaks to those who intend to listen. Those faded and worthless coins of Rome are displayed in museums today. Those trillion-mark banknotes of Weimar are cautionary artifacts in the hands of collectors today. The traces of our digital world will perhaps one day remain only as shadows on closed screens, but the human search for eternal trust and honesty will always remain. If this story has given you a new perspective, look a little more closely at that ghost in your pocket, because that ghost is either a friend carrying you into the future or a stranger silently dragging you to the edge of an abyss. If you want to continue this deep journey and keep discovering the financial secrets in those dusty pages of history, don't forget to follow us, because sometimes the greatest secrets are hidden right inside that small piece of metal sitting in your pocket.